So before I get started, there are a couple of housekeeping rules to go through. The audio for this session is available through your computer speakers or by calling in by phone. If you are experiencing poor sound quality, you may want to try dialing it in. In your control panel under audio, please select telephone and dial the number shown and use the access code and audio pin shown when instructed. Participants will remain muted throughout the session. However, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the control panel, which includes a question box. Please write any questions or comments you have throughout the session into the question box, which my colleague Evie, Ian and Edie will be monitoring throughout the session, and we'll address these at the end. For other technical issues, please use the questions box to let us know. We might not be able to help with all technical issues, but we will help where we can. To start with, I'd really like to outline the purpose of the Publishers Licensing Society. So PLS help publishers who've invested their time and money in creating original content. Our purpose is to help you manage, monitor and monetize your titles. So put simply, we're here to ensure that any secondary copying of your work, so by secondary copying, I mean photocopying, scanning, sending PDFs around companies. So we ensure that this sharing of material is properly licensed and that you receive revenue for such use. And it's important to remember that we're owned by you, the UK publishing industry, with the Publishers Association representing book publishers, the Professional Publishers Association representing the magazine publishers, the Association of Learned and Professional Society Publishers, or ALPS, representing journal publishers, and the Independent Publishers Guild, IPG, all sitting on our board. And this really represents the scope of the 3,000 book, magazine and journal publishers that we represent for licensing. So we don't just represent the big trade publishers and STM publishers, but we also represent a lot of small STM and independent book and magazine publishers. We're also proudly a not-for-profit organisation, deducting 6% from revenue in order to cover our administration costs. So before I go into too much detail, it's really worth looking back in time to see how we got here and to remind ourselves why collective licensing is so important to you. So collective licensing really became necessary in the 1970s with the invention and widespread use of the photocopier. Before this point, it had been there was no easy means of copying printed material. But it was at this point that rights holders really began to lose control over their work, and both publishers and authors alike realized that they really needed to do something in order to regain control over the copying of their work. Now, at the time, the Whitford Committee were looking at copyright reform in the UK, and so they decided that the situation should be managed through a voluntary solution, so licensing by the industry within the existing legal framework rather than by means of statutory licensing. And so this really led to this collective licensing timeline. So the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society were already set up in 1977 to handle public lending right on behalf of authors. And they felt that they wanted to represent authors in respect of collective licensing as well. So the publishers set up their own equivalent body to represent their interests, which meant that the Publishers Licensing Society was formed in 1981. And together, the ALCS and the PLS set up the Copyright Licensing Agency in 1983 to do their licensing on behalf of both authors and publishers in respect of books, magazines, and journals. And in 1996, the newspapers set up their own body, who were formerly known as the Newspaper Licensing Agency, and are now known as NLA Media Access. So while photocopying started it all, it's really important to note that collective licensing increasingly works with scanning and copying from digital originals, so websites, and also sending PDFs around organizations. And the reason for this is that digital has changed everything again. The spark of the internet and explosion of digital media has simply created even more risk, demand and potential revenue for creators and rights owners in the digital world. And collective licensing continues to adapt to reflect the change in copying habits of the users. And we felt that this quote by Adam Singer really summed up the importance of copyright in the digital age. So no copyright, no reward for creativity, no reward for creativity, no creative economy, no creative economy, no digital future, no digital future, no UK economy. Copyright is important. But why collective licensing? Why was that deemed the appropriate solution? Well, there are a number of reasons that I will outline, but these arise from the key characteristics of the blanket license that CLA sell to their customers. And that's that those users will pay a blanket fee to copy that enables them to copy small extracts of publications, and the licenses stipulate that they must own a legal copy of the work, and that the copying is for internal use only. So none of those licenses allow customers to republish work or to redistribute it outside of their own organization. And so what this means is that it remunerates rights holders for copying of their works where it's not practical to license directly. You can imagine if every university had to clear permission from the publisher in order to reuse a chapter of a book in a course pack or in a classroom, publishers just wouldn't be able to deal with the level of requests coming in. And equally, it means that it's a convenient one-stop shop for those users that do need multiple permissions to copy published materials. It also ensures an orderly marketplace and strengthens copyright awareness. The act of having to take out a license really really causes users to think about what it is that they can do with the content that they've purchased. And finally, licensing solutions remove the excuse for exceptions to copyright. And we keep the system easy for rights holders in the UK because of the way the system works. And I'll look at how collective licensing works here. You can see that we cover all of the rights holders, so publishers, authors, and design artists. And each of these are represented by their own collecting organisation who sit between the rights holder and the licensing agent, with CLA licensing magazine, book and journal publishers, and NLA Media Access licensing some magazines. CLA also have agreements with their equivalent organisations overseas, and you can see here those licensing agents sell licenses to the community, and the money that comes in from the licensees, and in the case of CLA overseas, is paid back through the licensing agent, who then split it three ways between the respective collecting organisation, who then pay that on to their members. This consequently means that when we pay any money to you, it is purely the publisher's share of the money, and you're not responsible for paying any share of that on to your authors or your freelancers, and that's because it's taken care of in the system. So for most publishers, your licensing is done through the CLA. So I'll take a moment to look at the day-to-day work of the CLA, and this will really give you a better idea of how the money they collect is generated. So as I've mentioned, the core purpose of the Copyright Licensing Agency is to sell licenses to companies. So they cover the business, education and public sectors, and as I've mentioned, the licenses that excel are primarily blanket licenses, which means that those license holders will pay a flat fee that's calculated based on the number of employees or within an organisation or students in a classroom, and this allows them to copy small extracts of work. Now, the second key aspect of the day-to-day work of CLA is then data collection. And the reason for this is that data is what informs the allocation of the license fee that is made, of the revenue that's made up by the license fee that licensees pay. So the CLA have a huge team of field officers that look at what's been copied in a sample of their licensees year on year. So for example, in schools they have the yellow box method where they'll put a yellow box next to a photocopier, and each time a teacher photocopies work they're asked to photocopy it and put it in the yellow box so we can track it, and it's still a very successful system in education. For magazines and businesses, for example, it works slightly differently. We look at data from press cutting agencies. So there's a huge number of different methods according to kind of the type of sector that we're looking at. And all of this data then informs the allocations that you receive. And CLA are also very involved in promoting respect for copyright. So they work very hard to ensure that their licensees are copyright compliant and that they know exactly what the extent of their license with CLA allows. And you can see here the reach of the CLA. So they license all schools in the UK with having a central deal with the Department for Education. They license 900 FE colleges. They've got 100% market penetration in the higher education sector, and they've just renewed their license with UUK for the next 3 years. And they have a huge number of businesses licensed, so 6,500, and they also license central government as well. And as I've mentioned, they have agreements with reproductive rights organisations, or RROs. So this is the equivalent of the system that we have in the UK. It's the equivalent body outside of the UK, which means that you're remunerated for copying of your works overseas. So you may have heard of the Copyright Clearance Centre in America or the Copyright Agency in Australia. So the CLA have 16 agreements with 16 countries for digital copying, 24 for scanning, and 36 for photocopying. And a key measure of their success is really the amount of money that they're able to generate year on year. So that was 75.7 million in 2015 to 2016, for example, and this converted to 35.2 million for publishers in the last financial year. And so this brings me to the second section of today's webinar, which is to really look at how you can make sure that you're getting the most out of this system. So there's 3 key areas that that PLS work in to try and increase, to make the most out of the revenue that CLA generate for our rights holders. So we do this by licensing your publications for copying. We maintain an up-to-date list of all of your titles under license. And we also distribute revenue to you and ensure that accurate reports are made available to you through your PLSE account. And so what I'll talk about here is the top 5 key account actions that enable you to ensure that you're really getting all of the money that you should be. But I would encourage you to go onto our website and also look at the webinar on a step-by-step guide to using your PLSE account, and this will really complement the 5 key points that I mentioned here. So the first important action is to ensure that you maintain a comprehensive and up-to-date list of your titles in our system. And the reason for this is that this will ensure that your titles are as visible to the CLA users as they can be. All of the system that you feed into your PLSE account will also feed back to the users through the check permissions tools that are made available by the CLA to the licensees. And you can do this in the title section of your account, either by uploading a spreadsheet, or you can also use Onyx if you're a book publisher. It's important also then to ensure that your titles are as fully included in as many licenses as possible. And you can do this through the licensing settings section of your account. You'll see in this section that there are a lot of different licenses that the CLA sell. Each name, so the business license, the education license, they're all referring to the sector in which those licenses are sold. And it's really important just kind of to opt into them all, because that will increase your visibility, and you never really know how your titles are going to be used by the end by the end user. And there are a couple of transactional licenses in this section, so the Higher Education Second Extract Permission Service and also the Document Delivery Service. And these are two licenses where you can amend the price in line with what you would charge yourself. It's important to keep up with new licensing and PLS opportunities. As I mentioned earlier, collective licensing continually adapts to the changing copying habits of the users, and we often introduce new licenses that are really aimed at bringing in new revenue for our rights holders, and we'll contact you when we do those, when we do bring in those licenses, and we'll invite you to opt in. So it is important to keep up to date with those e-bulletins that we send out. It's important to review your licensing revenue breakdown each month, so we will send invoices and remittance advices which will then match up with the reports in your PLSE account. It's important to kind of keep track of whether we're paying you for any titles that you don't own, and for you to let us know, but also if there are any fluctuations in your revenue, if you get in touch with us, we'll be able to look into it further. And finally, it's important to keep your company and user details up to date. So we normally have 3 types of contacts. The first will be the primary contact. This is the person that will get in touch with if there's any update on licenses or title queries. We normally will then have separate contact for finance, which is the person that we will send the invoices and remittance advice to. And then we'll also have a permissions contact. We have an online permissions clearing service, and we sometimes get requests through that, so those requests will be directed to whoever you've assigned as the permissions contact within your account. And so that's a very quick run through of the top key actions. I will be sending these slides around afterwards, so if you do have any questions, you can get in touch with me. And I can follow up directly. And so this brings me on to the last section, which is getting the most out of your account through PLS permissions management. We offer 3 core services alongside collective licensing, and each are designed to help you boost potential revenues from rights and permissions, but also to ensure that you're managing your rights and permissions more efficiently. And we do this by offering permissions and rights management workshops, which give practical tips, as well as getting you to think more strategically about rights licensing. But then we also offer a digital permissions clearing tool, PLS Clear, and this allows you to automate free of charge permissions, and that could potentially halve your workload. It'll help you organize and report on growing permissions, and it allows you to use a secure inbox. And also it is a means of allowing you to spend more time on profitable licensing as well. And finally, if you don't have any specialist staff dedicated to permissions management within your organization, we can handle your permissions business for you in the same way that we handle collective licensing. So we'll be dealing with all of the requests that come in, but we'll also deal with the invoicing as well. And so if this is something that you would be interested in, any of these services, please do let us know, and we can set up a time to discuss the logistics of how we go about this. And so this brings me to the questions section. If you bear with me 1 second, I'm just going to get the questions box up. So one question I have here is, does everything need to have an ISBN before it can go onto your system? Yes. What we use as a unique identifier for each title in terms of when we collect the data from the CLA licensees is the ISBN number for books, the ISSN number for magazines and journals, and also if you have online content, the top level URL, so the home page of your website. So all of the data that goes into our system, so when you upload through a spreadsheet or Onyx, needs to include that identifiers, the ISBN, the ISSN, or the URL, and also the name of the title. If you haven't got any, if you've got publications that don't have an ISSN number or an ISBN number allocated to it, you can register. So for ISSN numbers, it's through the British Library. And I think ISBN numbers, Nielsen will have more information about how you can purchase those. One of the questions is, do you include charities under public sector figures for revenue? I'm not sure which sector charities would fall under. I will have a look into that further and get back to you. And I will make a copy of the presentation available after this section, after this session. So another question is that you get inquiries from US universities about using material in the course packs. So there are exceptions in the US, but equally, so the CLA will license UK universities, but you can direct anybody coming to request permission for you for use of your material to PLS Clear, and also some of the types of copying that they will be requesting will come under the CCC, so you can set prices within your PLS account for the kind of academic permission services in the US. I can send out around some more information about that, but that will then mean that if they are using work that falls within those limits, then you will get you'll get remunerated for it. So yes, in some respects it would be covered by PLS. Where it's not, it would just be a matter of them requesting permission for you through PLS Clear. Are there any other questions? No? Okay. Well, we will send a copy of the questions that have come in with the answers. Anything that I haven't been able to answer, I'll circulate that afterwards as well. And if you do find that you have any questions, please do let me know afterwards, and I'll get in touch with you. We do really value your feedback, so there will be a feedback circulated afterwards, and we would appreciate any comments that you have. Thank you very much for logging on. Bye.